Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It's great to be with you all today. I'm excited for today's conversation with three folks that I have a tremendous amount of respect for in the various things that they do, kind of bridging also different aspects of this discussion today because we have folks who are organizers and cultural workers, writers, journalists, um, and artists, hip hop artists as well. And so it's a cool group of people to have a discussion with about this topic. In some ways, well, before I do that, do the basic things like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't on already, so share it with folks, let people know the conversation is starting up so that they can join in. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests right off the top. So Erica Caines is the field operations and membership coordinator for the Black Alliance for Peace, serving as the co-coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace Haiti America's team and the BAP Baltimore Citywide Alliance collective coordinating body. Erica is a member of the Black Working Class Centered Ujima People's Progress Party in Maryland and founder of Liberation Through Reading and many other things. Also the co-editor of the revolutionary African blog Hood Communists, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. I'll say for all of the people, check out the show descriptions because there's ways to engage with their work, support them on Patreon, and so on. Slank is an MC, a student of Black history, and a recent law school graduate. He is also a member of the Push Soul Collective with other conscious hip hop artists and producers. Slank has released several new projects this year, including Nation Time Volume 2 with Sonny Ture and The Fly Griot, produced by Anthony G. Supreme. More ways to connect again in the show description. Musa Springer is a cultural worker, community organizer, and journalist based in Georgia. They are the international youth representative for Cuba's Red Barriel Afro Dissidente. I'll let Musa correct me on that. And an organizer with the Black Alliance for Peace. They directed and produced documentary Parchman Prison, Pain and Protest in 2020, and are the host of the Groundings podcast, which again, I'm sure that you all check out already, but if you don't, you should. And they are currently working on a documentary titled E Mis Negros Que, with Black Liberation Media, and their book Alive and Paranoid was just published in this just spring 2024 with Iskra Books. We're gonna have another Iskra conversation next week too. So anyways, those are our guests. They're amazing folks. Except for Slank, I've worked with all of them in some other capacity at points in the past, and I'm happy to be doing so again. I'm going to start just by playing a couple of clips. So there's kind of a moment we're in some ways going to respond to Chuck D and what Chuck D, his recent involvement with the State Department. And I wanted to actually play a couple of clips, which take about 10 minutes of what Blinken said in this part of actually what Blinken, I don't think it's even his whole speech, what Blinken said during this press conference, and then what Chuck D said. And I think that will set up our discussion really well. And then beyond that, what we're talking about in terms of the role of music and art in imperialism, U.S. imperialism, and then in counterinsurgency, whether that's in domestic or international context. These are huge topics that go way beyond a figure like Chuck D, who actually has done solid political work in the past and is somebody that I have personally a lot of respect for, was somebody that was influential to my own political development at a certain point, which is why in some ways I feel like it was worthy of responding to. But this conversation obviously is much bigger than that. So I'm going to start with just a little clip from Blinken's speech. And just to give people context on this, there is a link on it. You can read the State Department release on this. But this is a new U.S. music ambassadors program that involves both the State Department, and of course the platform that we're talking to you on right now, YouTube, as well. So it's that's the partnership. All right.
All of us are here because we believe in the power of music to inspire us, to lift us, to stir us, but also to communicate and to connect, to express who we are, where we come from, what we value, what we love, and to learn the same from others. In that way, and I've seen this over more than 30 years in this business, music has a unique power in diplomacy, introducing others to our history, to our culture, creating ties that cross borders, strengthening relationships between our people and even our governments. The number of times I've been able to connect with counterparts, even in governments that have different views than our own, through music, it's been quite something to see. As one foreign correspondent wrote after seeing Louis Armstrong play behind the Iron Curtain, America's secret weapon is a blue note in a minor chord.
Wow.
Music is such a powerful diplomatic force because I think it taps into something fundamental, universal even. It's capable of expressing common emotions and speaking to shared experiences in a way that words alone simply can't. When Armstrong went to Ghana on the eve of its independence, he felt an incredible sense of kinship with the people that he met. He spoke about being inspired by them, by their liberation from colonial rule, and also heartbroken by the common struggles that Ghanaians and blacks in America faced. After witnessing police violence in one of his concerts in Accra, Armstrong was moved to perform Black and Blue. My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue? For decades, American musicians have reached across borders with their music. During the Cold War, Leonard Bernstein, the New York Philharmonic, endeared themselves to thousands in Moscow, playing Shostakovich. Sarah Vaughan became one of the best-known Americans in the former Yugoslavia after performing in Belgrade in the 1970s. In Berlin, just before the wall came down, Bruce Springsteen played to the adoration of countless fans. In post-apartheid South Africa, Whitney Houston stood alongside a new president, Nelson Mandela. Here at the State Department, we've worked to bring people together through decades of music diplomacy. And today, we're launching the Global Music Diplomacy Partnership that we believe can be transformational. We're so grateful, Lior, to YouTube, not only for the incredible generosity and massive global reach, but for the intellectual and creative partnership that this team brings to our endeavor. So over the next several months, together, we'll announce new types of English language learning through music. English language learning is maybe our #1 export. There is an extraordinary thirst around the world, and the State Department's been playing a leading role in doing that. Now, bringing music to bear in this enterprise, I think, is going to take it to a whole new level. We'll set up grants for exchange alumni to use music to expand access to education and to jobs around the world. We'll support aspiring artists and musicians so that they can participate in and grow local creative economies. At the heart of our partnership are our global music ambassadors. These are extraordinary musicians, recording artists, songwriters, producers, who will travel the world where they'll perform for new audiences, engage with young people, collaborate with local performers, raise awareness around shared issues of interest. And in all of the countries they visit, all of the communities that they touch, they'll share a window into American identity, American culture, American history, in all of its extraordinary diversity, and bring people together over the values, experiences, and challenges and hopes that we share. Our global
All right, so I paused it right there. He goes on to say that they come from different backgrounds and different traditions, and runs through them real quick there. And then I'm going to play next what Chuck D said, because I think it's important in some ways, because Chuck D has also sort of I want to say he's kind of saying like, I don't know. We'll get into what response, but I don't think that he's. I think his statement shows a commitment to this project that he's not sort of admitting that he has in his defending his own position and participating in this. All right.
What a nice crowd. Well, thank you, Secretary Blinken, and my career-long and honest mentor with kinfolk, Leo Cohen, and the other U.S. Global Music Ambassador appointees, Justin Tranter, Amani White, Lainey Wilson, Denise Graves. It was a pleasure meeting you. Breland, and Grace Bowers, and I'm honored to be standing next to all of you here today, and that's for real talk, as we say. Throughout my life and career, I've always believed in the power of music to change, create change, and also change things, and also give voice to the voiceless, power to the powerless, and also truly inspire lasting social change. Peace, like good music, is not easy to achieve. It takes time, detail, persistence, resilience, refinements, honesty, and yes, even creativity. So, Mr. Secretary, I know you know that better than anything with the way you get down. Today I was reminded, Leo just said, and yourself and Leo said about the jazz ambassadors who stepped forward during a time of great divide. You're talking Louis Armstrong, you're talking about Ella Fitzgerald traveling around the world in DC-7s, you know, when they were 50 or 60 years old. So we're pretty sure we have it balanced out now. With great energy, the civil rights movement here in the USA and the Cold War globally, to travel and engage the world on behalf of the USA people. And I know, and if they could navigate those challenging times, then so can we. Agreed?
Yes.
Now, it's the time for us all, as USA, American, and music artists, songwriters, and producers to step up and do our part by sharing our talents, our time, our understanding of the real connections that we can make through music and culture, that we can not only engage younger generations, and how young is young right now, right? Young could be under 40, who will be and who already are our future leaders, and also encourage peace in the communities and countries worldwide. I've been fortunate, and I started out with this guy behind me, at 116 countries out of the so-called 214. I've seen culture, music, and I've seen it move things in many ways. And this is a serious appointment at an urgent time. And my good friend Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine and my partner in Prophets of Rage said it best. You can't wait for things to happen. You gotta make it happen. Now, I've said a long time throughout my career, outside my art and music, that culture and arts brings human beings together for our similarities and knocks the differences to the side. Norman Granz was that person who took people around and worked with the US government at the time to take jazz artists across the planet in the 1940s. But here we are through the partnership with YouTube, where if you don't physically get there, the virtuosity of the screens could have an accountability and responsibility to not just go there, but also receive the art around the world to teach us how to have a better place here. And, you know, Leo, amongst all the accolades that we've been saying, in my beginning of my career, and he as a manager, I remember our first tours traveling to Germany. And then if you know anything about Germany, if you're too young to know, the Iron Curtain was in full effect. So if we're playing West Germany at that time, with a country split up into two, to be held accountable by the rest of the world and then the United Nations that they won't become what they were. As a performing artist, rap and hip hop, we're going from West German towns have to play Berlin. There's one road going to Berlin. And when you hit that area that you had to do the roadblock checks, you will be waking up, if it's in the middle of the night, to take that one road with dogs and flashlights to be able to get to Berlin, to play the show in Berlin, which is only West Berlin. On the other side of this wall, representing the curtain at the time, we're on the radio, and on the other side, we have just as many hip-hop, Public Enemy, Run DMC fans that's on the west side. But the Eastern fans can't get there. And the closest they get to the wall, they ain't thinking about hip-hop at that wall. So that all of a sudden became an issue that made us understand that our culture permeated all those barriers, all those divides. The music went beyond even what the radio could do, because we had just as many fans on the other side. And we happened to be playing Germany when the wall came down and opened up the world. So the common goal was always hit people from culture to give, receive, not about going to a place, but also enjoying what they had to offer hip-hop wise, musically, culturally, so we could take it back home and spread that with the love that we got it. So this is nutrition. The common goal hit people with culture. It's beyond governments, plural, but the responsibility for governments in this world, collectively, you don't want the music and the culture to be run by governments, so it's not, nor do you want it to be run by industry. So we as a culture in music have a wish and a demand and a dream to keep those two areas accountable, responsible, and to balance out this earth, to teach human beings true peace, not just in talk, but in action. And collectively, just like we all have to figure out how to take care of the climate and the environment, music is that message to teach all. So I thank you for this opportunity to make this thing better. So like this guy says, let's go to work.
All right. All right, that's crazy. Welcome to the stage, everybody. All right, so Slank, why don't you start? Because you have gone back and forth with Chuck D about this on social media. There was a debate which I linked in the show description. People can watch as well. That was on Revolutionary Blackout Network. People can check out. But yeah, I mean, you responded quickly when you saw there was Mint Press News. It was one of the first outlets that kind of published about this. And obviously now we could also talk about the context of the video, which I think most people probably didn't watch that actual presentation. They just kind of responded to even a participation in this right now, because obviously, we're in the middle of a genocide. It's a very strange time to cozy up to Anthony Blinken of all people. So anyways, Slank, I'll let you kind of start us off, and then we'll just kind of go around and people can we can just get a conversation going.
No, yeah. I originally, like you said, seen the Mint Press News like headline saying he was signed on to be an ambassador for the State Department. So I tweeted, is this true, Chuck? You really rapping for the I think Genocide Joe or something like that. But I don't know. His answers on Twitter were just all over the place. He was getting into it was like speaking in code a little bit, talking about if you use YouTube or use Google, then you're just as complicit as he is for signing up to be their ambassador. And it just wasn't making sense. And then, like you said, he came on Revolutionary Blackout Network last Friday. And he just kind of took it over. You know what I'm saying? He was telling a bunch of stories that really didn't have anything to do with the State Department or the issue that we wanted him to come on there to just talk about. He just kind of left us a little bit more confused than before we even got on there. But I mean, like you just showed, the video is pretty clear of, both him and Lior and Blinken are invoking this program of the 60s, the jazz ambassadors that sent these artists overseas as like Trojan horses for different like CIA programs to overthrow the Congo, overthrow whatever country they was targeting, and just to be able to get access to places that the CIA agents couldn't get themselves. And I feel like him literally invoking that just kind of shows he knows about the history of it. So yeah, I mean, he's just playing into that tradition, I guess.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, go ahead, Erica. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found out about it because my mom watches MSNBC, and it just so happened that he was on a panel. I'm not sure. I can't tell you which show at this point, but he was on a panel and he was discussing it, and they had other artists who were named. It was, I think, about 100 different artists, some obscure, some known within the Grammy circle, but not as famous as Chuck D. And that struck me because this is like fight the power Chuck D. And he has mixy politics notwithstanding in terms of like rhetorically, but I still think this was a bit shocking to make this step. And something we were talking about in the chat as we were watching this is that you mentioned that he kind of embraced this sort of cold world politics. And yeah, because the inception of this, what they called cultural diplomacy, was just that. It was about the Cold War that was happening. So they were sending these artists around. And then I think Dr. Jared Ball in I Mix What I Like, he talks about the use of Black artistry at the time as a sort of cultural colonial or cultural imperial mechanism, right? Because if they were showing that, wait, it couldn't be all bad over here if we have all these Black artists. So they were having them go around. I know Langston Hughes has participated in that. Paul Marshall has participated in that. So there's been a plethora of Black people that have been well known to do it. But essentially, the whole point of these sort of relationships, if you will, is to project a sort of normalcy within empire. So as you're seeing everything crumble around you, then here comes Chuck D talking about, oh, no, we just want peace. But it's so interesting that he could chuckle away at what Blinken actually does. And then the praise for Lear Cohen, it's just it's a very particular moment that all of this is happening with Gaza in the background, Lear Cohen being a Zionist through and through, and Blinken's role in funding this, in supplying and supporting what Israel's doing. And then here you have this Black artist talking about the time of peace, and then sort of evoking this ahistorical moment of the wall, right? And how the part that they played and how hip hop is so influential. We've seen that all of last year with the 58 years of hip hop, right? And how there's a sort of retelling of a groundbreaking revolutionary hip hop. So the result of that is what? Where Chuck D is now, or where we've seen KRS-One with Mayor Adams. So I do think that these dynamics that we're seeing play out really speak to the class dynamics, but actually the use of celebrity in these moments.
Yeah. Go ahead, Musa.
Yeah, I'll just briefly add. First off, I want to shout out Brother Slank because I think that the amount of very, very principled patience that you offered Chuck D, to be completely honest, was not even warranted. Because dude was calling you out of your name on Twitter for like a week straight at that point. So I just think that there's this attempt that often happens when people like that are called out to bring it away from the main topic, to get you to stop talking about the State Department and to instead start talking about these random anecdotes that he keeps throwing out, these random stories, these rhetorical questions he asks you in return that have literally nothing to do with the topic. And the way that Slank, you were able to continually bring it back to the State Department and say they are bombing Africans, they're complicit in AFRICOM bombing Africans, they're complicit in the genocide taking place against Palestinians. and you were able to continue to focus on this main contradiction right there, I really, really think that had you went in there yelling and cussing or just acting the same way he was acting, it wouldn't have been such a great masterclass and example for all the rest of us, to be honest. And so I just want to take the time to really give you your flowers on that. And I'll just briefly say, like, I think that what's happening is a lot of individuals like KRS-One, Chuck D, Killer Mike, and T.I., it's pretty much common knowledge at this point that the music industry is not a lucrative industry for a vast majority of artists in the long term. And so as individuals get towards the end of their career, or at least the end of their sort of mainstream marketable career, and they search for other avenues, that's a particularly vulnerable time for the State Department and the Alphabet Boys to step into their careers in a formal public way, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I'll leave it at there because I'm sure you got more questions and stuff, but I think that particular context of a lot of these artists who are doing these very questionable deals with the state, it's not because they have necessarily endless career aspects out there to tap into. And I think that's like not that's relevant to why an artist like a Chuck D or a KRS-One was literally tap dancing and shucking and jiving for Eric Adams on command, you know, which is, if you would have said 10 years ago that was the case, I wouldn't have believed it, right? And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate that. And I think we could kind of go there next, because I think that that's one of the things that actually I think Chuck D sort of says in that debate with you, Slank, although he doesn't really want to, you know, fully go there, but he does talk about these sort of limited options. And, you know, he has an interesting career because Chuck stepped away from Def Jam and the music industry, major labels, in 98. And he was very critical at the time. And he tried to go through file sharing and develop his own kind of autonomous platforms. And so I think there were some attempts by him at some point to kind of develop some alternative, and still are actually, because he still does this, but to try to develop alternative infrastructures. And he just can't compete with major corporations, right? He can't compete with the big six, which is now what, the big three or whatever. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that too, because I know, Erica, you know some of that history of kind of telecommunications and monopolization and things like that as well. But that point that you make, Musa, apologies, there he does say something about that, about if community doesn't support art, that you're basically choosing between, are you selling out to a corporation or are you selling out to the state, is kind of where he lands. And he's sort of like, I'm more comfortable selling out to the state than a corporation. It's sort of, even though he's like doing both, because his YouTube is part of this too, it's not, you know, one thing. And I think there's some real truth behind that, and a real problem that people have to acknowledge and deal with in terms of trying to make progressive, radical, revolutionary art outside of the boundaries of what the capitalist music industry wants or these imperialist entities are willing to promote. And I say that and still think it's completely unprincipled to work with the State Department, as you know, in any sense in the United States, based on what the United States means in the world. But even more so in this specific moment, with, you know, the fact that you're cozying up to the guy who's like a primary spokesperson for a genocide and defending it constantly, you know. So I'll say that. Slank, do you want to say any? We can kind of go in the order that we've started out.
Yeah. No. Like you said, he even made the point during the last Friday when we was talking that like he would never make a Instagram or like a Facebook because of Zuckerberg, but then he's down to like sign up to represent Blinken. So that didn't make sense. And like, because that's why I asked him a question about like, where does the line get drawn? Like, are you going to do the inauguration for Biden? Are you going to perform in Israel now because it's 2024? And it's a new world with technology or whatever. Like, kind of, he was trying to paint this picture that like stuff's different now, basically. And when he made the comment, I think it was in the context of me asking him about D1, who's a part of that. There's a program by the State Department called Next Level, where they have a whole lot of underground, like lesser known artists, as well as a lot of artists that are, like y'all been saying, toward like the end of their careers. I think even like Diamond D and Lord Finesse are on the website. So like old legends, as well as like underground, more younger artists and stuff, they get sent by the State Department. They get grants to go to like Croatia or Bolivia or Syria, wherever the U.S. is trying to like identify like future coup leaders and stuff like that. That's where they're sending these rappers. And Chuck D made the statement in that context of, we got to eat. Like he said something like that. I don't know the exact words, but like we have to make a living too. And if, what I'm saying, the community's not supporting your work, then I guess sign up for the State Department grants and go to Zimbabwe or whatever. But like, I totally disagree with that outlook on it. That's like a similar argument to what was made back in during apartheid. Apartheid South Africa would try to get Black American artists to come over and sing and dance at like segregated casinos and stuff to make it look like, oh, apartheid's not that harsh. Look, we got Eartha Kitt and Percy Sledge, and they're performing here tonight. And these artists from America, when they would go over there to perform in apartheid, would say, oh, we got to eat. We're not making enough in America. So we're going to take they would give them the status of honorary white when they went over there so they could go into the whites only hotels and resorts and, live like celebrities still, even though they're in a country where the masses of Black people is locked in like Bantustans and, treated like, third class citizens in their own country. So like, it's the same type of thing where, oh, we just got to eat. So I'm going to rep the State Department while they do a genocide. Like, it's where does the line get drawn? Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't agree also with him saying like art is apolitical. I think it's very political. And even when you take an apolitical stance, you're standing on the side of the wrong side of that political divide. So like, yeah, basically.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though, how support is viewed, especially support of artists, of what they are speaking of in terms of like community support, right? Because what is it that you're trying to maintain in terms of a lifestyle where you feel like you're not being supported by community, that you have to take these other routes. So I always think that that's just like a scapegoat kind of thing, and it's also very easy to say. You see that in a lot of different variations. It doesn't necessarily have to be Chuck D, but it's always ultimately, I made this choice because I wasn't being supported by a community. And then you really have to ask, like, well, what does it mean to materially support someone, especially an artist? And it's something that there's a story Musa always talks about, in Cuba, where someone had asked a question about, what is the role of the artist during revolution? And they were like, well, during the revolution, you put down your paintbrush, you pick up your gun. And I feel like that's a different kind of aspect to artistry that's held here. It's very individualized, and it's very, even that component of, well, community's not doing anything for me, so I in turn have to go and take care of myself. My family has to eat. And eating off of what though? And I get it. I think it's one of those arguments, right, where people say like, well, socialism, you expect people to be poor, and I get that people do want to maintain a particular type of way of living, but to what extent? Or to one extreme, because it doesn't necessarily have to be the State Department, but there's a plethora of ways where we're seeing people make these peculiar kind of choices in terms of who they're choosing to work with, link up with. The influencers on TikTok currently, right? They take these political gigs and these jobs, they take these contracts. But then again, right? There's this there's this kind of idea that you can make art apolitical, or you can be objective when making art. And I don't think that that's the case. And to Slank's point, the responses of Chuck, I don't necessarily know to what extent he understands certain things, but I do know that he understands what he's been told and how he's been told. Even the way that he tells the history. Like, I thought it was really interesting how he tells a particular history, or why he highlights particular moments, or why he even said the Cold War and spoke to the Cold War. You don't really hear that much, right? So it was a reason, especially highlighting artists like Louis Armstrong, who that was his main, the main purpose of sending artists like him and Gillespie and all them around the world was for that, to kind of show a bit more strength and a bit more unity, I guess, within empire to the other world, like, that American could still stand. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting conversation, because I think there's two things happening. There's the conversation about celebrity, the use of celebrity, and then also the role of the artist. And I do think that those are distinct things, because you can be an artist making these same choices without being a celebrity. But I do think the role of celebrity is very important in terms of like the use of it, like why Chuck D would be chosen and why we would hear him say the things that he's saying.
Yeah, I think the notion that art is this like apolitical thing that just comes out of your head, that comes out of nowhere with no material basis or influence is just is wrong, but it's also just funny because for decades now his art has like told us the opposite. And I think with it being him specifically, Chuck D, Public Enemy, the era of hip hop he came out of, and his work has never been revolutionary necessarily, but it has certainly been very political. Some of it has been radical. And so I think that the contradiction is astounding given who it is saying that. But I've been rereading Inventing Reality by Michael Parenti. And in some of the opening chapters, he talks about how the most brutal of empires don't necessarily strictly use physical violence and physical force to maintain dominance and hegemony. Um, and in fact, Michael Parenti says that the most successful forms of coercion and dominance are the psychological and cultural aspects. This is why Parenti is so interested in looking at the media as this kind of cultural apparatus. And so even in like the 1950s through the mid to late 60s, the CIA was pumping millions of dollars into abstract expressionism, which is like Jackson Pollock, the paint splatters where a 2-year-old could do it, but then it sells for $10 million. um, the CIA was intentionally promoting that during the Cold War and promoting generally the early beginnings of postmodernism, but they were promoting these abstract forms of art that they claimed were apolitical by pumping millions of dollars into ambassador programs where abstract expressionists would go around the world and teach abstract expressionism, which again, by definition, can be anything you want it to be. They would pump a lot of money into these new journals, academic journals, artistic journals that were promoting all of these artists like Pollock. And it was actually at the expense of Black abstract expressionists like Norman Lewis, who actually were using abstract art to make political statements. And so the idea that our art can ever be apolitical is wild, because all art is reflective of an ideology, right? All art is reflective of a class position. That is either going to be like the ideology of, like, for Slank and his music is Black nationalism. All y'all listening, I don't think we said this at the beginning. Slank is one of my favorite rappers. I just want to throw that out there too. I feel like y'all should really tap into the music. But like there's a clear ideology. Just because you present yourself as devoid of politics or ideology in your artwork does not mean that's the case by any means. And so the idea that we should take Chuck D seriously when he says there's nothing political about it, it's just art, it's culture, but you're literally working for one of the most political organizations in the world, to be quite frank. It's laughable, and it preys upon the reality that people in the US do not have a functioning definition of what culture is and isn't. People think like music, a poem, a play, a painting, like that is culture. Those are the products and artifacts and proof of a culture and manifestations of a culture. But culture itself, Walter Rodney said, culture is a total way of life, right? It's so much more than just this end product that we get to, and we're told here is this corporate for the culture kind of watering down of what culture even means. So yeah, I think he's preying upon the fact that he knows his audience and average fan base might not even have a functioning definition of culture.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I want to stick with you there for a second, Musa, and then we can, move back around. And audience, if you have questions for us, like feel free to just, ask them, because this is a pretty free flowing conversation today. But he had this specific moment on Twitter, and I think Slank, you called him out on this too, but where he was like, Castro wouldn't let him play Fight the Power. And and this is like yeah, that is part one. Um but this was like, he basically was using this to demonize Castro and Cuba, and sort of say like that, this is how he knew that they weren't about his project. And it's interesting to see that right alongside him talking about uplifting these stories of US Cold Warriors basically in the cultural realm. Like, he actually does, as you said, Slank, have a grasp of that history and is articulating it. And then when you're in a debate with him and you're connecting him to that history, he's like, "Oh no, that was a long time ago. I don't have anything to do with that." But he's like directly referencing it in his own speech. Um, and so anyway, I think, yeah, maybe we want to go there. Like, there's a little bit, because I think this helps us also think more about what's at stake too in some of these kinds of cultural projects. Um, he talks about Ghana. Blinken, I think, talked about Ghana, and it's like, okay, but a year later, y'all overthrew Kwame Nkrumah, like, and so the yeah, there's definitely, there's the over element of it, right? Which might be that they actually like sneak in CIA agents into places, right? Which can still happen, but like there's also a much bigger cultural front that they're engaged in, where they're trying to convince that freedom of expression, right? The thing that Chuck D is so frustrated he didn't have in Cuba. I wasn't able to sing my song about fighting power, um, that's kind of lifted up as this ultimate democratic ideal. And so then if a state is like concerned with these capitalists and commercialized notions of expression that go against the way of life that they're trying to instill, that's seen as regressive or wrong or authoritarian or whatever, without any other context of like the material conditions or anything else that's going on in the state. So yeah, Musa, maybe we start with you with that, and then Ricky and Slank, if you have comments too.
Yeah, I mean, upon seeing Chuck D said that Fidel Castro wanted to behead him or what, first off, there's a level of incoherence that you kind of have to get through that I feel is a bit intentional, but it's neither here nor there. But it's very unsurprising. If to be honest, Fidel probably years ago saw an opportunist from 90 miles away and said, "You can actually keep that over there," if we're being completely real. Because Fidel did have a history of doing that. But I think something that Slank said to Chuck D, which was, "Where do you draw the line?" is actually a really basic, very simple question for artists and cultural workers. Where do you draw the line? Because I've met artists who feel that they're revolutionary artists, but they're doing ad campaigns, with like companies on the BDS list or whatever. And so this question around where do we draw a line is a deeply cultural question, because it's how we establish our norms and our ethics and our values. I have a cousin who I helped raise, and when he became a cop, I haven't spoken to him since in years. And I told him that would be the outcome. And that's a hard decision, but that's also drawing a line. That's drawing a politically principled line. And so I think that is really the $1 million question. But as it relates to Cuba, you know, especially during the 90s and the early 2000s, the State Department, the CIA used Black artists, specifically rappers, as attempts to essentially foment like counter-revolutionary and anti-revolutionary sentiment on the island. And so they would essentially go on delegations organized by nonprofits that have connections to the State Department, or through the NED, National Endowment for Democracy. They would go on these delegations, meet with local rappers there, and then tell them, oh, yeah, isn't hip hop the perfect way to talk about how much you hate the government, right? You hate your government, right? You know, and one, they would be fishing for sound bites, to have just recorded of Cuban rappers saying whatever issues they perhaps do or didn't have with their government. But then they would also sort of push this US perspective of hip hop, of rap, of US individualism, capitalism, these counter revolutionary sentiments. And it was actually so bad at one point that the Cuban government felt in hip hop's early years that it was a counter revolutionary force and they wanted to ban it from the island, because so many of these CIA backed rappers were coming through. And it was Asada Shakur and Nahanda, another comrade of Asada's, who worked with the Cuban government to understand there's a revolutionary aspect to hip hop and to form the Cuban music, agency that they have now. But so it's really unsurprising to me when I hear someone like Chuck D, who's tap dancing for Zionist Leor Cohen and genocide Blinken, to say Castro would have beheaded me and he wouldn't let me come and perform. And it's indicative of like this larger dynamic that there is a cultural and psychological war at play. What Fidel Castro in the late 90s would develop and call the battle of ideas. So he would say that we have not just like the boots on the ground war, but there's also a fierce battle taking place ideologically and politically specifically through the cultural sphere. And so I don't know. To me, actually, I would like for him to go and perform Fight the Power in Cuba. I'm sure there'd be a lot of Cubans who would love it. And then afterwards, they're going to come up to him and be like, hey, what's this deal with you taking a picture with Blinken? Because they're smart as fuck, And so let him go. He'll get the treatment.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of like Fight the Power and what it meant here, and how I guess the idea that it would be something that needed to be heard in Cuba. But to Musa's point, it's 2021. I think July 11th, right? Was it 2021? That was the uprising where they used that hip hop song. Was it Patria y Vida? And that group was a product of a State Department NGO in Cuba. Like they had like a program where they would have all these different cultural artists, including hip hop artists. And that was like the theme song for like the uprising that was played mostly in Miami. But again, to the point about how it's seen as a counter-revolutionary force, Fidel Castro is very famous or infamous for speaking to the battle of ideas and really understanding the context of which we're living in, and how all of these things are not just because, like none of this doesn't exist just because or by happenstance. So maybe he did have some foresight into Chuck D, but to Chuck D's point, or just artistry, and it's Musa was saying about abstract artists. Like, I hate postmodernism for this very reason, because it kind of gives way to that idea of the free thinker, right? That all of these things are devoid of material conditions. Like these are just things that devolved out of a lived experience or individualism or how you feel. And the art becomes a product of that, right? The art just becomes subjected to an individual and how they feel about a thing. And you see that through the development of postmodernism, not just through art, but like politically, that has had drastic effects. So yeah, I just wanted to make those insertions because I'm really curious. Like, I'm not on Twitter for obvious reasons, but so when I see these things, I'm like, wait, how the hell did Chuck D get in an argument about Castro? Like, why is this happening? And then when you see what he's saying, and then it's like, okay, so this makes a lot more sense why you are with the State Department, because it's very much those kind of lines about like you said, authoritarianism and how a state gets to choose what's best for that state and how people get to develop those things. And I've seen that kind of replicated in not just what Chuck D says, but in how people approach the idea of a state in general, like who and what gets to dictate what happens and what makes something authoritarian and what makes states bad, and that kind of concept. And I think just following along with his tweets, you kind of see a lot of those questions exposed.
No, definitely. And yeah, how y'all was talking about Cuba too. Like Musa brought this up. That he used that as an example of like the repressive government that wouldn't like let him do his art, whereas he was like talking about how good West Germany was. I guess in like the late 80s when, yeah, that's like I guess former Nazis and stuff and NATO. But I don't know. I felt the West Germany story too, which is crazy to even bring up because he's talking about like, oh, I just happened to be there when the wall fell down too. Me and Leo are like, that just sounds shady right there. That made me want to think, like, were you working with the people back then too? Like, why were you in West Germany when the wall went down with Leroy Cohen? But yeah, no, that something stuck out to me.
Yeah, and I wanted to also add, first off, I think that people underestimate what we call soft power, and people should perhaps read Kwame Nkrumah, Michael Parenti, who deal with the concept of soft power, Antonio Gramsci. But it's basically the idea of coercion and influence without having to put boots on the ground. And in a war fought with soft power, any worker can become a weapon or a tool of the empire. If the State Department could find a way to employ mechanics and the people who check your receipt on the way out of the grocery store, they would find a way to ship them to whatever socialist country they could. It's what the U.S. military explicitly states is total global dominance. And I don't think we sit with that term enough. Total global dominance. That includes airwaves, land, sea, and they have carved the world into regions: AFRICOM, SOUTHCOM. Probably, there's more. Erica will probably tell me in a second. But I think that like understanding the material basis for like how we get to somebody like a Chuck D, or even having an ambassador program by the State Department, the fact that that exists in the first place, right? It's not a coincidence that that exists. And so something else that I did want to point out is in my professional life, I never shared this publicly, but I've worked in communications for a long time now. And one of the things I do is I train people for like media trainings, how to talk in an interview, stuff like that. And I teach people the art of pivoting. If you've never heard of like pivoting, that is what every politician does. When you get asked a question that you don't want to answer, that whoever your handler is who has trained you has said, do not talk about this thing, you pivot and you divert to something else. So this is like when they ask Joe Biden about sending arms to the Zionist entity, and he starts completely talking about something else, or he pivots and changes the goalpost. So and I went back and watched this too to make sure I wasn't tripping. So I sat through that interview twice. So yeah, someone can cash at me like $5 or something. But every single time Slank mentioned the State Department and the primary contradiction, every single time he pivoted. He would pivot by either asking rhetorical questions in response or by switching to an anecdote. He asked Slank about his mother. He asked the other host of the show if he had children. He starts, right? So this is textbook. Like, I literally clipped a 10-minute segment of that interview and sent it to one of my coworkers because this is what we train people to do. This is pivoting. Like, I messaged Slank, I think right after the interview, and was like, bro, 100% the whole time. Someone told him every time this comes up, do not talk about it and pivot. And so for someone who's been in the entertainment, he's been in the entertainment industry for decades. He called Leor Cohen Zionist music industry head, who Leor Cohen is the same one in the Breakfast Club proudly talking about promoting violence and gangs and drugs and music. Like he's actually proud of doing that because he said it makes him a lot of money. So to think that this individual has not been media trained over decades to learn what the art of pivoting in an interview is crazy. He was very obviously trying to do this senile Red Robin run around the question style of pivoting that is it's honestly what Republicans do really well. Like you can watch Kellyanne Conway in literally any interview ever and you'll see it happen. So I just wanted to point that out too, that there's like a very I can recognize what I teach to other people, so I could recognize that that's exactly what he was doing.
Yeah. Erica, I know you have to leave in a minute. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of say before we let you go? And then, we'll continue a little bit longer than that, but go ahead.
Well, I could just maybe start the conversation, but I do want to kind of jump on what Musa was saying about soft power, because it is something that we, especially in BAP, try to highlight primarily because it's not really discussed. And then we have policies like Global Fragilities Act and such that really utilizes the National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID. Like they go hand in hand with the State Department. So whenever you see those kind of humanitarian efforts or those NGOs pop up under USAID, it's always connected to the State Department. And there's a quote in the Washington Post, I forget who the founder of the USAID is, but he says, like, what we were able to do in the CIA 25 years ago, we can do with the USAID today. So that's just to show like the actual role of the USAID and these NGOs, which is a lot why Nicaragua has kicked them out, and why a lot of these, nations have very, very strict rules around nonprofits. Something we should consider. But the other thing I think you mentioned quickly before about the Telecommunications Act. So Musa was talking about it. I continue to maintain that the 90s is severely understudied for a plethora of reasons, especially now that people are talking about Project 2025 and highlighting it. But there has always been, in terms of media, there's always been like a chance for opposition or two sides, right? It's always been a sort of two sides reporting. I think C-SPAN is a result of that. Like C-SPAN really wanted to highlight a sort of independent, and then also captured a lot of these debates between both sides and things like that. But from the prominence of the Telecommunications Act, it's became like a pundit-driven media. And we can see that prominence from like talk radio late at night, which was completely ran by the right. Those independent late night talk radios, but that sort of style of punditry carry through. And I think it's really important because that is how we actually digest all of our news today. And it's not insignificant, especially when we consider like, what are the roles of these people? And we're seeing that play out in different ways. I'm very, very, very cautious of TikTok still to this day. And people still try to convince me, Musa, one of them especially, that there is some positive use. But I just think because it's focused on algorithms, or it's based on algorithms, what you consume is based on what you already consume. So, but that's not to say there's not a whole other existing thing happening on TikTok, and there is. And I think the more that we talk about these kind of platforms being radical platforms, or they're teaching the youth, we look away from the use of the platform for the State Department. And a lot of the people that we highlight that talk about Gaza today, we're talking about Ukraine 2 years ago, all wrong, right? And they're talking about Project 2025 today, encouraging people to vote. And I think the way that we do not control media, with the advent with the Telecommunications Act especially, but the way that the left, especially now that whatever happened over the weekend is really gonna tighten a lot of things for a lot of people, But the way that we see that the left gets smited, there is no real way to push back on what Chuck D is doing. Because Chuck D is on MSNBC highlighting this. Like, he's on MSNBC on a panel discussing the same speech. Louis Armstrong, going to Germany. Like, these are talking points. And there's nobody that's going to be on that panel that say, wait a minute, though. But why? Like, why do you think that's a good idea? And I think that that is really important to highlight in terms of how these policies have really constrained our ability to really showcase that this is a real issue outside of our like independent groups. But furthermore, they push these issues and they normalize a lot of these things, and there is no competition, there is no sort of rebuttal against it. So I just wanted to just note that. But I do have
I think it's yeah, and thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate you joining us today and leaving us with that as well. I think that point too is it's actually interesting because in some ways, you know, Chuck actually does kind of cite this himself, you know, of like there's a way, I mean, it's not something, I want to be clear, it doesn't rationalize working with the State Department in my view at all, right? That's not something that we can accept on principle. But he does sort of make the point that, like, you know, in the 80s and the early 90s, art like what he was making with PE, or like if we talked about a group like Boots Riley with the coup, you know, the coup, other groups could have a more radical platform and actually be saying things that, I mean, Chuck D said, you know, picture me working for your army, never. Like, you know, like he was very clear in, like, you know, in the 80s, like if you go back and read the lyrics of stuff he's saying, not just in Fight the Power, but in a lot of songs, I mean, he's critical of a lot of things, but one of them is certainly the United States government and the fact that he's a black man in the United States government and it doesn't represent him, right? It's not his government, right? And so the point that Erica makes about how over time any dissenting or you know, voices that are very critical of, like, for, you know, imperialism, right? Or military or US involvement in certain wars and things like that. I mean, even on like YouTube, right? Like there are certain things that if we monetize our channels and we say them, they can demonetize our videos because they're like, hey, you're not allowed to talk about elections. You're not allowed to talk about what's going on in the Ukraine. You're not allowed to, like, so these things can just get a video demonetized like that. And so, you know, that doesn't matter too much to somebody who is like, okay, like this channel, like if we get a video demonetized, it's not the end of the world. Like we have other means and other things that we do. We have our Patreon, we have, you know, stuff like that. But like, for somebody who's engaging full time in content creation, like, one, there are certain things that you can be rewarded and paid to say and do very well by these entities, and there are things that actually will get you in trouble, potentially kicked off even, if you do them. And so, I mean, we could even talk about the demonetization of Black Liberation Media, you know, for 3 months or whatever the case is. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that as well. So anyways, Slank, go ahead. We haven't given you the floor in a while.
No, talking about like the pundits and like the news, the way, like, that reminded me just kind of a thing Chuck D kept bringing up too was like how this appointment is a fleeting thing. A couple months, it's going to be over anyway because Biden is going to be out. And so I was like telling him, like, this program existed during Trump, it existed during Bush, Obama, like it's going to continue. Are you going to still, I don't think he ever answered that. I might have tweeted that at him. Are you going to still like continue to be an ambassador in the next Trump administration? But like, I feel like a lot of our elders, like older Black people specifically, they watch like CNN the same way like old like white people watch like Fox News. and they get into this, like, even if everything else they say is super radical or like super like for the culture or whatever, when it comes to like elections and the Democratic Party, especially because of Obama and like the significance and representation that they tie to that, like they're gonna drop all the radical stuff and get in line with like Biden or the Democrats to stop Trump no matter what. And it seemed like a lot of his motivation might even be some of that, just being like a 64-year-old black man. He's, just trying to make sure he fights Trump or something. I don't know. But like at the end of the day, Trump, like we've already had a Trump presidency. And I mean, it was bad, just like the Bush and the Obama and all the other presidencies, in my opinion. So like that Trump boogeyman thing didn't really scare me as much as like I feel like it does a lot of older people. And I think he might have been coming from that like CNN older like Russia Gate type like mindset on a lot of shit.
Yeah, I think in addition, something that really stood out that I wanted to highlight is he kind of dips into talking about organization for a little bit and organizing, and I mean it's really confusing to try to decipher because I think it was intentionally not coherent. But he essentially makes the point that what y'all want me to do has to be done through organization. I'm just an artist. It's kind of what he boils it down to. And I'm thinking, one, if you're saying that the State Department is offering you the means to travel the world and spread quote unquote culture, why not just then do that through an organization, right? The AAPRP, MXGM, Republic of New Africa, BAP, Community Movement Builders, they send members on delegations around the world all the time. There's ethical Pan-African ways to tap in with the entirety of the African world. If he wants to go beyond that, there's ways for that as well, right? And so I think that part was such a straw man to assume that the only way someone like Chuck D is able to spread his message is through the State Department. When I know there's a lot of organizations who, if he would just tap in genuinely with and do some work, they would probably love to orchestrate a concert in Burkina Faso or something, right? And so, as someone, the limited traveling I've done in my life has been through organizations. And so when he started to kind of get to that point, I thought that was another very clear, odd contradiction. I think that we're at a tipping point. We're past the tipping point, I should say, with hip hop, where it is such a corporate captured industry that the actual norm is to be in the house. The norm is to work with the Zionists. The norm is to twerk in a Sabra commercial and sell apartheid hummus. The norm is to do concerts with Amazon, that's like literally destroying the planet and busting unions. And so when you have like genuine independent artists, or even just artists with like an ounce of progressive politics or ethics, I think that it appears like this is what we think of all rappers are already doing and should be doing. But if you just understand on a basic level how the industry works, there's a reason why they are all selling their likeness to hawk cheap products to consumers. Hip hop has essentially, as a culture, and again, I'm not saying this is like all artists, I'm talking about like the capitalist industry. It is a one big anti-black trope and stereotype through which corporations can sell products and services and goods. It is a veneer of blackness, credibility, however you want to describe it, but it is built upon tropes and stereotypes that people like Leor Cohen orchestrate and promote, through which corporations who, like we said earlier, there's about 3 major music entertainment corporations really in the world, but particularly in the US at this point. So if I am a snack conglomerate, say I make chips and I make billions of dollars making chips, and all kinds of snacks. And I say, there is a missed opportunity in this black, quote unquote, black market. Let's create rap snacks. And the right, or ballroom and black TLGBTQ ballroom culture is getting very, very big, very popular. Oh, let's really quickly hop on that and let's create a TV show around it, and let's have some people voguing in an Amazon commercial. Right? So this is how the industry functions, and this is actually how rappers make their money. It's selling their likeness, hawking cheap products and consumable goods to the black masses. This is like this is capitalist exploitation. And I think the point people miss is that the state uses hip hop the same way. So like the same way corporations are using hip hop as this tool, the state, whether it's the State Department, FBI, CIA, or the NYPD, as we saw with KRS-One, T.I., and Killer Mike tap dancing next to Keisha Lance Bottoms in 2020, the state is employing and using rappers in the same exact way. And so that is always the point that I'm trying to make, is like, when you say, what is the line? I'm sure Slank and me, struggling artists, as some people probably call them, if we wanted to flip a switch and really make a bag, I'm sure both of us could do that, right? Like, I'm sure, Slank, you could probably be the next State Department ambassador and go on a world tour and make soft Christian rap music like D1, and you could probably actually start living off of your art in a new level, right? If I wanted to go down as a poet, if I wanted to become the next Amanda Gorman, reciting a poem at the inauguration at the White House, probably mix in some like Tragic Mulatto stuff, some pro-US empire stuff. Like, there's a very, very clear route that that's like the norm for us to take to advance our career. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'm kind of getting at, but basically Chuck is just like upholding the norm, and it's just such a stark contradiction given who he is.
Yeah, appreciate that. A couple quick comments. One, I just want to say one interesting thing at Chuck's career to kind of follow, Public Enemy's career really, is to sort of note when they drop their albums, and especially their albums that are like most politically critical. Like, it is typically during Republican administrations, right? So they were very big in the Reagan Bush years. They basically were non-existent during the Clinton years. They did drop the soundtrack to He Got Game in that period. Then they get back together, do some stuff during the W years. I don't think they were that active by the Obama years, but they were also fairly unfortunately, I would say, irrelevant at that point. Um, and then Prophets of Rage was like Rage Against the Machine, Chuck D and Be Real's collaboration, minus Zach De La Roca, but that happens during the Trump administration and is very much a like anti-Trump, never Trump kind of project. And so, there's not a lot of criticism of Democrats. And I think that part of that could be their own politics. Part of it could just be kind of opportunism of knowing a lot of the people who buy their music are probably white liberals and liberals in general, right? And so they don't want to alienate their audience. The other thing that, based off of what you were just talking about, Musa, that I did want to make sure that I covered with both of you all is, yeah, how you all approach this, right? I mean, because I think even within radical artists, right, or people who do like, there's a Two Black has talked about this in the Indianapolis context of like the way that you get offered to do the mural, or you get offered to do the city, installation. You might get offered to make a song, or play at the opening for the mayor, or things like this, right? And this is happening, and it's a way that a lot of artists, again, like, I don't totally I don't think they're horrible people. I disagree with it, but like a lot of times people are just like, "Oh, hey, I'm gonna do this art project because it's gonna pay me, and I'm not getting paid otherwise, and I can make." Sometimes they'll justify it like, I can do something radical or cool with the mural or whatever I'm a part of, but you're also participating in this like city, state kind of sponsored project. And so, yeah, I'm just curious typically how both of you kind of approach it. I know it's one thing among many that both of you do, um, but just in terms of trying to have kind of an ethical, principled approach to making art.
No, yeah, I mean, I guess because I'm not like at no like Chuck D level, so I don't have opportunities, you know what I'm saying, to like go hang with Lior and Blinken and stuff. But no, I guess most people that I make art with are people that are like similar to myself and in similar positions. You know what I mean? So I've never really had like an issue of like having to question whether I'm going to perform for something that I didn't agree with. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's I feel like that comes more when people are trying to like climb up into the more mainstream area, I guess. Cause yeah, I mean, like everybody I usually make music with, I either grew up with or like, basically we had the same values. So I've never had like a situation like that. But I mean, if it was like a thing to perform at like a police benefit or something, I'm definitely not doing that. Like, you know, or like Friends of the IDF, I'm not going to be at that. So yeah, just stuff that I just disagree with like that, I wouldn't want to align myself with. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know, Slank. You mean you're not accepting the invite to the Blinken family dinner? And nah, I think similar to what Slank said, like when you're not necessarily chasing like that a very mainstream kind of route, you don't get the opportunities. Like when you don't give them an inch, they don't try to take a mile. And so I have turned down a lot of opportunities throughout my career as a cultural worker. Um, for example, during 2020, during the George Floyd uprisings, someone offered me, for me as a poor ass person, what felt lucrative, a book deal essentially. Um, and I like, I molded over for a day or two, but ultimately, like the publisher was super not politically aligned. It felt opportunistic. It felt at odds with my values. And so I think just having an actual political and ideological basis from which like I create, whether it's poetry or documentaries or whatever, like just having some kind of basis and foundation in general guides not just like me as an artist or creator or whatever, but just in general. Like I think having ethics that stem from political and ideological foundations is really important, because you're never devoid of those things. Like I said earlier, if you feel that you are apolitical and you're void of ideology, it typically means you're just reflecting the colonizer norm, the colonizer ideology. Um, but I think something that Amilcar Cabral said was that he said, culture is a fruit of a people's history and a determinant of their future. And he's speaking specifically about colonized Africans. And I think that for me, when I'm making decisions related to my cultural work, that's often my question is like, how does this relate to my history and how does it kind of move forward as a determinant? And um, that's why Cabral is really influential for me, because that's a helpful way for me to think about things. And then the last thing I'll say, being a community organizer or even activist or just like conscious person who has groups of other conscious people around you, I don't know what that looks like, it's different for everyone. That in and of itself innately guides an artist, right? Like an artist with no political home, no ideological basis, that's like a loaded gun that could be potentially in the wrong hands. And so, like for example, in Atlanta with the Black Alliance for Peace Atlanta, we just wrapped up a cultural intifada series where we taught free community art making sessions on like printmaking, wheat pasting, graffiti, poetry, zine making. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but we did this was like over several weeks. We had a community art show where a bunch of local rappers who we know and fuck with performed. We had poets who performed. some African drummers, but so like when I think of quote unquote for the culture, like that's the kind of things that my mind gravitates towards. Those are the kind of uh environments that nurture collective creativity, collective artistic production, and gets us out of these like individual um opportunistic, kind of career options. Um and I will say, like, people on Twitter accuse me all the time of being a spy for the Cuban government, and I'm like, if they could just send me my paycheck, like just send me my paycheck and maybe some benefits too, and yeah, I might be, who knows, but um, it's often not like the CIA knocks on your door and asks if you want to be a spy. It's like the local police department wants to influence the black youth, and the first thing they think of is, oh, let's reach out to some local rappers. They need money, we'll pay them $600 to perform. Right? It's often very inconspicuous because of how power actually functions under capitalism.
I don't know. I know some students who were learning Arabic at like UC schools, and the CIA just reached out to them and were like, "You want to come?" um, so I will say, but I agree. It's not generally how it works. One of the things that you brought up there, Musa, which brought me back to something that Chuck said in the back and forth slank that you were a part of, that I found really fascinating. He said that Kwame Ture had basically told him that, hey, we're the organizers, we're the political people, we have to handle this, we have to move in a principled way. You're an artist, artists just have to do whatever they do. And and then he also references people like Jamil Al-Amin. And so like he references people who are like deeply principled figures. And this is the interesting part, because I agree with what you just said, Musa. I mean, if I just went off and started doing a bunch of really weird stuff, like you would text me, like a lot of people would. Like I'm not as in as many organizations and stuff like that as like you and Erica are really like amazing at all of that. And but I have enough political community around me too that we do talk. Like Josh would call me, you know, and so that is one of the things that I felt a little bit. I mean, one, he's naming somebody who's a political prisoner who's very difficult for people to get in contact with, and a person who's no longer here to say, in Kwame Ture, to say, no, like that's not what I meant, Chuck. I didn't mean go work with the State Department. You know, but I think that that's like an interesting way of sort of like also invoking this. I do believe, because of who he is and how long he's been around, that he has had relationships with a lot of people who are deeply principled political people who probably, you know, but it's I don't know, that part was just interesting to me, because it was like he's sort of name dropping, right? And then also um suggesting that he was basically given this mission by people who are more radical than any of us are, right? Or who have a better track record, right? And anyways, that was an interesting moment. And yeah, I don't know if you want to respond to that, Slank. The other thing I would ask you too is just like, you talked about your values and your politics and the people you grew up around and that aspect of things, but what, if you want to say more about what has informed that for you, like what are your, where have your political commitments kind of come from through the years?
Uh, definitely just I mean, a lot from my dad, because he, what I'm saying, had a big impact on that, and just also just growing up in Kentucky during the Bush years, it was pretty racist. Uh, I had a particular experience where like a teacher kicked me out of class when I was like 14 for reading Malcolm X, this racist teacher. And so like that just showed me like the power of learning, and like how like angry it made this teacher that I was like reading Malcolm X in class. But so yeah, that definitely drove me to like just keep reading more. It's like everything I could find, especially stuff that I thought like white people didn't want me to read. So But yeah, but also like Musa brought up, there's so many. I feel like with the Chuck D thing too. Like there's so many ways you can go and spread and protect hip hop culture outside of the State Department, whether that be organizations. One of the other things I thought of was like he could call up like a bunch of other older wealthy rappers. They could throw a concert for Jamil Al-Amin or Mumia or something like that instead of like doing a concert for Blinken. Like I don't know. There's I know when I was reading a book on Khalid Muhammad, they had an issue for a march they were trying to do in Harlem, getting a stage, and like Master P sent all the equipment and all the money, and like Khalid was on stage like telling everybody buy every Master P record y'all can find, like shouts Master P. And I don't know what his politics are really like that, but I don't know. There's a lot of, I feel like, older hip hop artists that used to have similar messages to Chuck D, or even if they didn't, would be willing to do something for Black culture that wouldn't have to be co-signed by the State Department. And I think that'd be like a better thinking of like alternatives, because it's easy. Like I can sit here and just talk shit about how he's working with the feds, but like it's not just the fact that he's doing it like that. There's other ways he could do it. And so yeah, I think those are like some important ways that would have stayed more consistent to the old message of his music type shit.
Yeah, right on. We're at about 90 minutes. I don't know. Is there anything that either of you want to say in closing? I just want to echo. I just appreciate both of you and the work that you do, and Erica as well. And appreciate you coming on and talking about this. We have a few more minutes. If anybody has a question in the chat, again, feel free to drop it. We can respond. Thanks for everybody coming in and listening to and checking this out as well. And I guess, like, is there going to be a follow-up to that the debate? Because I know it was sort of referenced that it might be.
Yeah, I don't know. So the day after, he tweeted something else in response to like I said something about he was shucking and jiving, and he responded basically saying he wasn't going to come back on till January 2025, and then this whole long message about Trump. I can try to find it. Let me see exactly what he said. Hold up. It was interesting.
I think it's also like the fact that he was calling you out your name for almost every single tweet too. I just again gotta mention how fucking disrespectful that is.
Yeah.
And then he was getting real hot that people were calling him Shuck D. Meanwhile, he's calling you like not your name the whole time, right? I just gotta add that.
Yeah. I was also wondering if he was confused in some way too, because he kept calling you a DJ too, which I was like,
yeah, I noticed that too. But I figured as soon as I seen like Rome try to like break in to say something, they were just like yelling at the same time. I just didn't feel like doing the the yelling thing to correct him on that point, I guess. So I just let that slide. But I can't find the tweet now. But he definitely said something about he'll come back in January. He said when the election's over, so he can tell us how about Trump or something. I don't know.
Yeah, probably he doesn't want to have to apologize for genocide Joe or Butcher Blinken, and anymore. But yeah, and that, I think that was a great point you made, Musa, earlier too, about the pivoting too, of like, in some of the things that he pivoted to actually are interesting and relevant, and like not relevant to what he's talking about, but actually like he has solid analysis of certain things, like his concerns about technology and things like that, I think are totally valid spaces, like I don't love that we have to have these conversations on this platform. I would much rather that we could have them on something that, is not also partnering with the State Department to do that program, right? So there are plenty of other contradictions that we can talk about for sure, but he very much did it all in terms of not addressing the very specific contradiction that people were asking about.
Yeah, I think too, something I really want to nail down on, because we mentioned Cuba earlier, is just like the notion of culture, quote unquote culture in the US is so different than the rest of the world. Um, in the La Marina neighborhood of Cuba, which is like the blackest and one of the poorest neighborhoods in all of Cuba, the world's most famous rumba group lives there and has their studio there. This is Los Muñequitos de Matanzas. They've won 3 Latin Grammys. They have toured the world for 50 years. They've had like 4 iterations of their group. They are a celebrated national icon and they live in the poorest neighborhood. They walk among the people. There's no celebrity culture around them. And they see rumba not just as a music, but as a way of life, as a way to connect with people, as a way to share their values and their messages. Culture is not some commodity that they're wanting to trade in, right? It's like it's something that's integral to who they are. And that's something that is in common whether you're in Louisville, Carrollton, Georgia, Havana, Cuba. Um, when we think of culture from the ground up, like individuals like Slank, I saw Sonny Toure, who's another dope rapper. I saw him in the chat earlier. Um, like doing culture work from the ground up looks different, it feels different, it's a different career, it's a different lifestyle, but it's actually more in line with what the rest of the world sees and views as culture. And so part of the cultural imperialism is to go to other countries and just change the very definition of and way that they think of culture. Because it's a collective experience and a collective expression of like communal customs and practices. And most people around the world get that, right? It's here where we have this massive industry that is ran by Zionists and imperialists that gets muddled and confused, and what allows for something like a Chuck D to take place. And I also think that since we're being critical of rappers, one, it's not just hip hop, it's not just rap. This is just what we talk about because one, we're interested in hip hop, and two, for me at least, I talk about Black African people, and that's what it is. But like virtually every Black artist on a label is doing a form of shucking and jiving, whether it's selling you flat tummy tees and waist trainers, getting you to sign up for subscriptions you don't need and don't really want, getting you to buy cheap products that you don't actually need. This is like, I just want people to really think about the function of the cultural industry within the US. I mentioned earlier, you got artists like Megan Thee Stallion with Sabra commercials. You got rappers doing Nike deals, even though Nike uses sweatshops. Beyonce, cracking the whip on women in Sri Lankan sweatshops for her Adidas collab. Like the problem is not even just Chuck D. He just is right now like the highest contradiction that we can point to. But the whole entire industry is embedded by the private sector and embedded deeply by the State Department at a local, state, and national level. And so I just think that if people think more about how the actual industry and the act of being signed to a label functions, then these connections become a lot less abstract.
I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I just want to say too, like part of the reason, because I thought about this a little bit, like as far as white music culture, it's all, I mean, yeah, you could find a few artists that make, anti-capitalist or whatever, but like, you know, like it's sort of assumed by me, and it probably should be stated that all of it is basically a part of imperialism, capitalism, and the American project more broadly, right? And I think Chuck D for me stood out in part because he's done not only his political stuff, but he's also done a significant amount of work over the years to try to stay even out of some of the commercial paradigms. So then to just say, hey, I'm going to be an ambassador for the State Department is a pretty stark, shift for him. So a couple things from the audience real quick, if we have time. Joshua Palmer asked thoughts on difference between mass, pop, counter, and official culture on that point you were making, Musa. And we could probably do this one as kind of related. Matter asks, what do you think the obstacles in the way of a new wave of collective art making? What are the obstacles? Ditching old individualist art versus whole industry. Either one of you can say some thoughts if you want.
Wait, can you bring that second question back up? Let me say it again.
Yeah.
Mm,
Collective art making, yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely like glad that I'm part of Push Soul Collective, which is just like an independent collective of artists. With like Sonny Toure, who I made Nation Time with. We just put out another album too called Soul Cycle recently. But just finding like-minded people that also want to make, art that has a message. I think that's like definitely a way, because and also at the level like independent artists, you don't really have to worry about your stuff being censored and stuff like that. So I can say what I want. But yeah, I would say just trying to just make like organizing with people who are on the same type of stuff as you, and like making the best art y'all can with the most positive message or whatever message y'all trying to push. And like, because the industry at this point, I don't think you can like reform it. It's so like all the record label heads are like Zionist lawyer guys that are like trying to just make money off of the worst stereotypes, everybody's been saying here. So yeah, just organizing with people who are on the same thing as you is definitely probably the best way to do something outside of the system that is make more of a difference. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to that second question, my answer is similar to Slank. If it's not an organization, make it a collective, form a collective if one doesn't exist where you are. But do create in community with people who you fuck with politically, socially, ideologically. Don't create in isolation. I think a big thing is we live in a capitalist industry that very, very, very deeply devalues artistic labor and cultural workers. It is designed against us, and it discourages us working together, actually. Like streaming, I think you stream a million your song gets streamed a million times on Spotify. I think you get like $1,200 if I'm not mistaken. That might be an overshoot, to be honest, but you get a fraction of a penny per play, right? So it's not the actual like very technology of the industry is against the artist first and foremost, especially independent and smaller artists. I think another thing too, and often like traveling around can help you kind of rethink this. We got to like redefine what we view as a successful artist. Like if I'm loved in my neighborhood, if I'm invited to all kinds of local events to read poetry and I'm able to sustain myself from that, that's cool. Like there are singers who sing every night of the week in a bar and they get paid for it and they love what they do, and that's a fulfilling career. And so we have to actually redefine what the goal is. um Being rich, being global, and all of these things, like these are ideals that are fed to us from bourgeois capitalist culture, colonial culture. um so like perhaps the idea is to just find an audience of appropriate size that really loves and fucks with you and supports you over a long period of time, and you're satisfied with that. um like I don't make enough money off of my art. I have a 9 to 5. Like I got off work 10 minutes before joining this interview. And I would probably like it if I could maybe make some more money off my artwork, but I'm not willing to like sell my soul to the State Department to make that happen. So I think we should really redefine what the goal is, redefine what we view. I mean, even in the fact that we've created words and language to demonize and make fun of our community and independent artists, like SoundCloud rapper having a negative kind of connotation to it. Where like half of the people are like Instagram photographers if we want to start labeling things. Um so I think, yeah, we need a cultural shift around how we value and deem an artist successful. And then to the other question about pop culture, mass culture, counterculture, hegemonic culture, I would encourage folks to read Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall is a Jamaican who wrote a lot about culture and pop culture. And he essentially says that pop culture is a reflective mirror to the ruling class. And so in the US, the ruling class is capital, it is the imperialists, it is the Zionists. So therefore, our popular culture reflects those values. There was like the BET Awards recently, and there is this like, I watched some of it, and there was a scene where like Lotto, formerly Mulatto, which is a whole thing, is like damn near naked and just kind of gyrating and just repeating what you gonna buy me for my birthday. Like that's the whole chorus of the song, apparently, is what you gonna buy me for my birthday. And like we have to stop and ask ourselves, like, what culture is this reflective of? It's not African culture, it's not our culture. Like we love our African women, we love our African men, we want unity. Um, even the most apolitical of like Africans in the US will tell you that. So we have to ask ourselves, what is pop culture reflecting? Or even the idea, thinking of pop culture and mass culture as a reflection of the ruling class. Think about within the last year how the US flag and Americana aesthetic is suddenly now more and more and more encroaching upon pop music and hip hop and rap music too, a la Chuck D. As the US goes to war, as our imperial aims kind of like necessitate nationalism in this moment, right? So that's what I mean when I say pop culture is like reflective of whoever the ruling class is. Our role is to continue to push a counterculture, a politically and ideologically aligned counterculture. Um, but like Erica said before she left, like the Telecommunications Act of 1996 consolidated, essentially deregulated, and led to the privatization of most of our entertainment forms, TV, film, radio, especially. So we're it's like an uphill battle for folks like Slank and myself. And that might sound cynical, but to me, it's just the reality.
Right on. I think you both. I think it's a good place for us to leave it. I appreciate you both a lot for the conversation. Hopefully, we can do it again, maybe on a different topic, or not focus so much on one one figure. But definitely, again, I encourage folks to check out the show description. There are ways in it to connect with everybody who was here today, to find out more about their work, to support Musa and Erica and Slank in their projects and in their work. So I encourage people to do that and to check out everything they're doing. And just thank you to Musa and Slank and Erica as well for this.
If I could say one thing real quick, brother Slank, I have a dream of being a rapper, and I really want to hop on a song. And
No, I know. I sent you I need to send you some more stuff because I know we was talking about that a while ago.
yeah, I just want to put it on wax. Like, I genuinely think that you're dope. I think what Push Soul is doing, I love all the new music y'all got coming out.
Appreciate it.
Rappers, singers, all that. You're really, it's corny, but you pushing soul, like I really fuck with it for real.
No, appreciate it. No, I'll definitely hit you up about that.
Right on. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great one. Free Palestine, too.
Peace.
And fuck the State Department and YouTube and Lear Cohen.